Hello, everyone. Today I want to take a look at reading. Yes, reading. So, as a ghostwriter, I think reading is really important. And if you want to get into writing professionally or get into writing specific things professionally, I believe that reading is a must for anyone who's aspiring to write well or to write professionally. Now, you might be asking, oh, reading? Why? Well, just like artists and, sculptors and musicians learn from the greats, new and aspiring writers can learn from people who have written before, who have made it before. And by reading like a writer, you can learn technique, style, and even forms of voice, which you can then learn to transform to accommodate your own style and approaches. You can also learn from other writers' mistakes as well. It's basically following the idea garbage in, garbage out. If you read garbage, you're going to write garbage. But if you read an amazing book, there's a higher chance that you will subconsciously or consciously take on some of the more positive aspects of that writing and incorporate it into your own. Only rare people simply know the path to great writing, so don't put undue pressure on yourself because you aren't a natural. Instead, you can study wisely and practice thoughtfully, and then you will be a pro, really. And this is why I'm suggesting that objective analysis of great writing is in many ways democratizing, okay? When you realize that you can learn this by studying, you realize that you are no longer shut out of the pearly gates of writing. It's up to you and what you are willing to invest into your craft. Okay. Now, the genres we're going to cover will be children's picture books, children's drama, children's fantasy, comedy, drama, fantasy, historical fiction, horror, mystery, poetry, romance, science fiction, supernatural and paranormal, thriller, and Western. The lists that I'm going to give you are going to be recommendations of great or popular writing. This is a very, very, very important for me to highlight, okay? Great and popular, which means that some of the books that I recommend here aren't going to be necessarily good, but they're going to be popular. And therefore, you will understand that while there are some things that are better written, there are some things that are popular for a reason. And it is good to study both good and bad writing, not just to learn from mistakes, but also to understand perhaps the importance of archetypal power, to understand why people might be still reading something that's super popular, even though it's poorly written. Okay, so for children's picture books, we have Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice B. Sendak, The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein, How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Dr. Seuss, Winnie the Pooh by A.A. Milne, and The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. These are classics for children who are very young, and there are other picture books with more or less text, such as The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats, Three Little Pigs by Stephen Kellogg, Madeline by Ludwig Bemelmans, The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle, Goodnight Moon by Margaret Weiss Brown, and Love You Forever by Robert Munsch. These are like top tier books. I've read all of them. If you haven't read them, then you have no business writing for very young children. Most of these books are usually paired with a very powerful illustrator. So if you want to write children's picture books, read these and then make sure you have a really good artist on hand if you are not yourself an artist, because these books have very unique art attached to them. It's something that you will need to have handy to make your children's early books, early readers come to life. Now, for children's drama, this is kind of related to like slice of life, everyday living, or just general topics, okay? So the 5 that I'm going to highlight in particular, I'm going to cheat a little bit, is The Secret Garden or A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, Black Beauty by Anna Sewell, Bridge to Terabithia by Catherine Patterson, Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery, and Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing by Judy Blume. Now, you will notice that a lot of these are classics, and they are very large in scope, some of them ranging from having more personal single character stories to more modern stories to stories focusing on an animal. So you can see that there is quite a wide range. In my also mentions, I have books that boys will enjoy particularly, like Our Man Weston by Gordon Corman, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. Then there are also the Junie B. Jones series by Barbara Park, Heidi by Joanna Spyri, The Saturdays by Elizabeth Enright, The Call of the Wild by Jack London, Amelia Bedelia series by Peggy Parrish, Holes by Louis Sachar, the Ramona series by Beverly Cleary, and Swallows and Amazon series by Arthur Ransom. So some of these are particularly helpful for boy readers and some of these for girl readers, but many of these books will be appreciated by both boys and girls. And a lot of these stories usually focus on the character journey through a particular conflict, or whether it is internal or external. Now, children's fantasy, I mean, you can't go wrong. You just kind of throw in a dart and you'll hit something. It's probably children's fantasy because it's quite a big and healthy genre, generally speaking. But if I was going to say you have to read something, these are the 5 that you need to read. And once again, I'm cheating because I have some series in here. Some series. Okay, Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, Keys to the Kingdom by Garth Nix, the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. So here I have 3 standard fantasy series, and then I have 2 books that are more comedic or whimsical. And this is chosen on purpose to give you a full range of what children's fantasy can look like. And of course, there are way more books for children's fantasy. Let's take a look here. Tom's Midnight Garden by Philip Pierce, A Wrinkle in Time series by Madeleine L'Engle, Stuart Little by E.B. White, Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan, The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum, The Rescuers by Marjorie Sharp, Tuck Everlasting by Edith Nabbitt, Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, The Sword and the Stone by T.H. White. So that's children's fantasy. Once again, check all of these titles out. They're worth a read. If you want to write for children and you want to know where is that line in terms of what is too adult or what is not adult, these books will kind of give you a good range of what you can work with. And of course, you don't have to limit yourself to making your children's fantasy, high level. It can be very modern. It can be very action oriented, but you should study these to understand what kinds of tropes, what kinds of interests might pique a child's fancy. And on top of that, you can learn a lot from various conventions that you can use. For example, should I have a prologue? Should I have epilogues? Or what kind of narrative structure should I be relying on? All of this you can learn by reading these books. Children's historical fiction, this is another one that can be very interesting to write for, a very, very powerful genre. So we got Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, When Hitler Stole the Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr, Goodnight Mr. Tom by Michelle Magorian, War Horse by Michael Morpurgo, and The Silver Sword by Ian Serraillier. Now, there are other ones like Johnny Tremaine by Esther Forbes, My Name is Aram by William Saroyan, Emil and the Detectives by Eric Kastner, The Trumpeter of Krakow by Eric P. Kelly, Otto of the Silver Hand by Howard Pyle, The Eagle of the Ninth by Rosemary Sutcliffe, Adam of the Road by Elizabeth Janet Gray, and King of the Wind by Margaret Henry. All of these books are related to history, but they have a fictional aspect to them, which make them particularly interesting to read. I've read a chunk of these, not all of them, but a chunk of them. I really got into historical fiction at an age, I think I was around 11 or 12. I got into stuff like, for example, Eagle of the Ninth and Goodnight, Mr. Tom. I reread that 3 times over the years, over the decades. And each time I read it, it gets worse and worse in terms of emotional impact. That's emotional damage. Very worthwhile reading these books if you want to get into writing historical fiction for children. Comedy is an iffy one. Are there books that are strictly comedy? The answer is yes. However, I discovered in my research that comedy books are generally fucked, just like comedy these days, because most of the books are written by women and are extremely politicized. Even the ones written by men are heavily politicized. And I feel like that, to me, takes away some of the fun. So all of the books that I'm going to list off here, you're going to notice, are a little bit old-fashioned, because I feel like modern comedy has become less about the foibles of human nature and more about politics. Okay, so let's take a look here. For comedy, I have these 5 recommendations. Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding. Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town by Stephen Leacock. 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. And The Innocents Abroad by Mark Twain. Also mentions would be The Princess Bride by William Goldman. Jeeves and Wooster by P.G. Wodehouse. Mike and Smith by P.G. Wodehouse. Stephanie Plum series by Janet Ivanovich. And Starfighters of Adamar by Aaron Alston. Now, what's fascinating about this list is that you can see that some of them are more about slice of life comedy, and some of them, like Princess Bride and Stephanie Plum and Starfighters of Adamar, are more related to specific IPs or specific genres. So Princess Bride is comedy fantasy. Stephanie Plum is comedy mystery. And Starfighters of Adamar is comedy sci-fi. Starfighters of Adamar is a Star Wars book. So these are all genres that mixed with comedy to create something genuinely funny. And I've read almost all of these, I would say. Except I think I never totally finished Stephanie Plum series, but I've read most of this list. And so I can say, hand on my heart, that a lot of these are funny. But once again, it's not always ha, 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 ha. But it's definitely funny. Some of them actually had me laughing out loud. And it's not the same kind of comedy that you might be thinking in your head, like, Ricky Gervais or anything like that. That's not what this is about. It's more about being funny, but not necessarily making a statement about anything. Okay, then we have drama for adults, and this is once again focused on, let's say, human on human experiences, human journeys. So let's take a look here. 5 would include The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Only Alien on the Planet by Kristen D. Randall. Also mentions are Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, Hamlet by Shakespeare, My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, Lord of the Flies by William Golding, The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. So as you can see, all of these are fairly heavy to read. But once again, if you want to write something heavy, guess what? You got to get in on the know. You got to understand, what do people consider to be heavy? Now, one of these, 2 of them are more modern. That would be Only Alien on the Planet and The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. The Curious Incident is a story told from the perspective of someone highly autistic, which is a great read. It will definitely push your perception of what you can achieve with writing. And Only Alien on the Planet is a more low-key drama book, basically. Very low-key look at basically trauma. Yeah, basically it's about helping someone get through trauma, basically. In both cases, being more modern, there's a different standard for writing, but it still is very, very, very crucial to understand what modern readers are expecting, and so I included them in this list. Now, for fantasy, of course, we're going to have all of the usuals and then some, because fantasy is an extremely, extremely saturated market in terms of publishing. There's a lot of fantasy to be had. And so you need to understand, who are you competing with? When someone goes into a bookstore, are they going to pick up a book they had read a while back and want to reread again for good times? Or are they going to pick your book? Well, you got to know your competition. You got to know what people expect. And you got to know what people are looking for. So let's get into it. We got the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien, Game of Thrones series by George R.R. Martin, Watership Down by Richard Adams, Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan, and Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. I included Pratchett in the top 5 because I think Pratchett is unique in the sense that he has a comedic twist to his fantasy, and that is something that's a bit rarer. And very enjoyable, very enjoyable. Also mentions, okay, let's buckle in here. Good Omens by Neil Gaiman, Night Circus by Aaron Morgenstern, A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin, The Once and Future King by T.H. White, Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey, Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson, which is part of the Malazan series, Redwall by Brian Jacques, which is also a series, Dragonborn Chair by Tad Williams, Sword of Shannara, which is a series by Terry Brooke, Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, who also has a bunch of series, The Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski, and His Dark Materials, which is part of a trilogy by Philip Pullman. So, once again, before you embark on fantasy, know what people have done before so you don't make the same mistakes and so that you can bring something new and fresh to that already highly saturated genre. Historical fiction. This is a tough one because not many people are able to write good historical fiction. There's this level of knowledge that you have to have when you embark on it. So perhaps a really good idea is, if you want to write a specific set of historical fiction, you should focus your historical fiction reading on that particular time period. However, if you want to know about different types of approaches that you can take with historical fiction, consider this list. The House of Nicolo series by Dorothy Dennett. Of course, I'm going to mention her, right? The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. Also mentions War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. Outlander by Diane Gabaldon. Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas by John Boyne. Shogun by James Clavell, The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society by Mary Ann Schaffer and Annie Barrows, All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque, The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. So these are historical fiction books that are very, very different in how they approach things, how they write, the style, the narrative flow. Everything is quite different from one to the other. Honestly, if you want to see where your writing can fit into the historical fiction genre, this is probably a great list to start with. Get reading. Horror. Okay. Horror is another one of those things where people might think, well, I mean, that's pretty lowbrow, isn't it? Wrong. Horror can really achieve quite a bit if you know how to go about it. And not all horror is attempting the same thing. There is a difference between the terror horror, the slasher horror, all of that kind of stuff. So let's take a look at some what I consider to be classic horror or must-read horror and other also mentions. Okay, so we got Dracula by Bram Stoker, It by Stephen King, Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, and At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. Out of these 5, the only modern one I entered in was Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, because Jeff Vandermeer is part of the New Weird movement, and I think it's important to know what's happening more recently within the horror, paranormal / thriller genre. I think it's crucial that you know what's going on with the New Weird. Also mentions are The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, World War Z by Max Brooks, The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris, Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, Coraline by Neil Gaiman, American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis, Life Expectancy by Dean Koontz, The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, The Complete Tales of Edgar Allan Poe by Edgar Allan Poe, The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, and The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. So in this, you can see I've added some Gothic literature in there because I think Gothic literature is so crucial for understanding the general movement into horror as we know it today. LitFic stands for literary fiction. This is the most pretentious kind of approach to writing. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Let's be charitable, okay? Literary fiction usually represents a kind of fiction that is pushing the edges of narrative, or is trying to make a statement, or is trying to be elevated, high art, and it is very similar to drama, okay? So let's take a little look at what I consider to be literary fiction. And if you want to write something pretentious, or you think you have a pretentious idea that you want to present in this high elevated kind of way, here is a reading list for you to take a crack at. Okay. House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, White Noise by Don DeLillo, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, Life of Pi by Jan Martel, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And other mentions include The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger, The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, The Stone Angel by Margaret Lawrence, and Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. Yeah. Okay. So this is a very broad list. Once again, not a lot of books in here, you notice, because, drumroll, I don't read a lot of LitFic. I'm going to be honest, I always want to put my head down on the table after I read a LitFic story, and not always because it's a good thing, unfortunately. Okay, mystery. So writing mystery is always very difficult because, number one, you always have to have this kind of hook that makes it stand out from other mystery stories. And number two, you really have to be really organized as a writer. Otherwise, your time spent writing mysteries will feel rather painful and drawn out. So how can you avoid, just repeating what someone else has done before? Well, you read all there is to be read for mysteries. And there's actually quite a lot because the mystery / thriller genre is alive and well. Women particularly seem to love reading mysteries, and there are some thrillers and spy mysteries that men also will just lap up. So let's take a look at some top mysteries that could help you understand what niches are popular or what niches have been popular, and what to avoid or what kind of narrative structure you can go with as you unravel your own mysteries. Okay, so we got the Hercule Poirot and the Miss Marple series by Agatha Christie, Lord Peter Wimsey series by Dorothy L. Sayers, the Sherlock Holmes series by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. So one of these is more modern than the others. But let's take a look at also mentions, which is Chief Inspector Gamache series by Louis Penny, The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, Anatomy of a Murder by Paul Beegler, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by John Le Carré, Harry Bosch series by Michael Connolly, Alphabet series by Sue Grafton, and Whip Hand and all of his other horse mystery book stories by Dick Francis. So these are major mystery writers that I think you should be dabbling in before you even attempt writing mystery. Now, for poetry, things are a little bit more loosey-goosey because you really should read the poetry that you want to write, essentially. That's my takeaway. You should read the poetry you want to write. However, it's always good to diversify because then you can push yourself on a literary level when you approach your poetry writing. So if you want to write like classics or old style poetry that is unique and different, read, Sappho, Homer, Rumi, Levi, and Basho. If you want to write sonnets, make sure to check out William Shakespeare, John Donne, Edna St. Vincent Millay, John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Okay. If you want to write modern free verse poetry, check out T.S. Eliot, Sylvia Plath, Langston Hughes, Ezra Pound, W.H. Auden, Maya Angelou, Carl Sandburg, and William Carlos Williams. If you want to just read general popular poetry, for lyric or narrative poetry or ballad poetry or any just, general poetry, Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, Robert Browning, Edgar Allan Poe, William Blake, and Walt Whitman. If you want to read poetry that is very special, which is related to kennings, make sure you check out Beowulf and the Seafarer, who are written by anonymous people, and Gerard Manley Hopkins. For kids, check out Shel Silverstein. Specifically, comedy and whimsy, check out Ogden Nash, Roald Dahl, Edward Lear, and E. Cummings. Some of these will overlap with the kids as well. So as you can see, there is a whole bunch of poetry that you can get started reading tomorrow. I personally have read quite a few of these because I do write poetry of all sorts. And I feel like almost every one of these poets that I've mentioned have given me new insight into how to use language and words. So even if you are going to write any of the other genres, I think it's still important to read some poetry so that you understand all of the vocabulary and poetic forms, figures of speech, figurative language, all of that kind of good stuff, so that you can incorporate it into your prose in a very natural, organic way. Yeah. Okay, romance. Romance is one of the largest genres out there, and a lot of people consider it to be sort of lowbrow because it's like a no-brainer type of thing to read. But even if it's considered to be fairly superficial in terms of intellectual weight, that doesn't mean that it's always easy to write. There are things that you can get away with in romance and things you can't. And depending on which niche you're writing for, you really, really need to know what's going on. You need to know your competition. You need to understand what is the audience looking for when they pick up a romance novel. You don't want to end up flamed out of existence because you don't respect or understand what romance genres are doing in the past and what they have done in the past and what they are doing today. So, top 5 that you should be reading before you even start putting pen to paper would be Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Twilight series by Stephanie Meyer, The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks, It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. Other mentions include Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood, The Captive Prince by C.S. Pascat, The Duke Who Didn't by Courtney Milan, The Proposal by Jasmine Guillory, The Duke and I by Julia Quinn, A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas, The Sherbrooke series by Catherine Coulter, Mallory Anderson Family Saga series by Joanna Lindsay. Some of these are sheer Harlequin romance stuff, but some of them are not. For example, Pascat is male-on-male romance, which is extremely niche, but it is something that people like to write and read. So once again, depending on your niche, depending on your interests, you need to get out there and be reading as much romance if you want to make this a paid hobby or you just want to actually write well when you share your stuff online. Now, when it comes to writing sci-fi, there's a whole gamut, just like fantasy, because a lot of people are inspired by each other when writing sci-fi. or inspired by real world events or their concerns or their wishes or their dreams. And of course, before you embark on writing sci-fi professionally, or, if you want to improve your sci-fi writing, it's time to get reading. So what kind of stuff could you get reading? I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, Neuromancer by William Gibson, The Man in the Castle by Philip K. Dick, Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, and 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. So these are my top 5 picks. I've read them. I think I didn't finish 1Q84 because what happened? I moved. And it was so big and fat, I simply could not take it across an ocean. Yeah, Sag. But all of these books will help transform your ideas about what you can achieve with science fiction. Some, like Isaac Asimov and Haruki Murakami, are more wordy and prosy, and some, like Stephenson, Dick, and Gibson, are more pulpy. They're very visceral and very immediate. I actually prefer Gibson. I am in awe of that kind of stuff, and Stevenson as well for me. Just very awe-inspiring. But let's not forget there are other great sci-fi books out there, so here are some others that I will add as well. Dune by Frank Herbert, 1984 by George Orwell, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series by Douglas Adams, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, The Martian by Andy Weir, The Three-Body Problem by Leo Sheen, Hyperion by Dan Simmons, Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, and the Thrawn series by Timothy Zahn. Now, it was very, very hard for me to decide on what Star Wars book to recommend, but I think overall most people would agree with me that the Thrawn series by Timothy Zahn is probably peak book content. But I will say, if there was another Star Wars book I had to recommend, it would be I, Jedi by Michael Stackpole. It's the only Star Wars book written in first-person perspective and is very fascinating. Okay, so thrillers. I'm not really into thrillers. And so I picked what a lot of people seem to say is the best. So let's get into it. So Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane, The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris, The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, The Alienist by Caleb Carr, Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Also mentions are The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, The Couple Next Door by Shari LaPena, The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell, A Kiss Before Dying by Ira Levin. Probably Hoover. Something by Hoover. Colleen Hoover would go in there. Probably. I don't know. I'm not really into thrillers. I've seen Shutter Island, the film, and I was freaked out. I would never write a thriller, I don't think. So good luck. But from what I understand, almost all of the books I just listed are considered like top, most famous, most popular, best of the genre. So check them out and see what's going on. Now, the last one, like thriller, I have almost no experience with. I have no interest in writing Westerns. Not really, anyway. So what I did was go to a website where they told me 21 Western novels every man should read. Now, I'm not going to list all 21. I'm going to list the ones that I actually have heard of, even though I have not read them. Okay? So these are books I have heard of in passing from other people or people online. And I'm including them in this very short list for Westerns. But if you want to write Westerns, the good news is they're not entirely dead, but it's kind of a dying genre. Sag. Okay. Shane by Jack Schaefer, Hondo by Louis L'Amour, True Grit by Charles Portis, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, Dragon Teeth by Michael Crichton, and The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford by Ron Hansen. Okay, so once again, a lot of these lists are well populated, and many of the books on this list that I've mentioned for all of these genres, I have actually read some of them myself. And the reality is that if you want to be a good writer, you're going to have to read a lot. Okay. You're not going to get away with reading just a couple books here and there every year. You're going to have to consume a lot. You're going to have to consume the classics so that you know what good writing is. And you're going to have to consume modern stuff so you understand who your competition is. When you read a lot of what you want to write for, you understand where the gaps are. Okay. So like, for example, when it came time to writing fan fiction for MCU, I was particularly interested in writing for Loki, the Loki side of business. What did I do first? I actually read a ton of fan fiction, not just because of research. I genuinely wanted to read fan fiction about Loki. But as I was reading, I was subconsciously, mentally taking note of what tropes were being covered, what tropes people were always focusing on, and which tropes were being mentioned but weren't being really written for. And it became extremely apparent to me that there were a few positions or ideas that I could take and run with in a very original way and actually expand on certain ideas or concepts or motifs that I'd seen other authors touch on. So my reading wasn't just for entertainment. There was an aspect of research to it that allowed me to write something meaningful in the long term. So similarly, you should take these lists that I have just read out, and they're up on screen. You should take these lists and you should get to doing your very necessary research. Because I think there's something to be said about knowing your competition and understanding what tropes and motifs and themes aren't being touched on as much as they could be in that specific genre that you want to write for. And once you have a more original niche or more original take on something, then there's a higher possibility of standing out in the crowd instead of just repeating the same old that everyone else is writing. So yeah, that's it for this list of lists, the list of lists. So as a ghostwriter, once again, I can't recommend enough the importance of reading. And I hope that you will be able to feel more inspired and confident about tackling your writing after you finish your reading. Now, did I miss anything for these lists? Was there any book that I didn't recommend that you would also recommend? Leave your recommendations in the comments down below, and I'll see you all next time.